The climb is never finished. The Silent Arsonist, The Anatomy of Ruining Our Own Lives. Based on the book The Mountain Is You by Brianna Wiest, and adapted into a narrative format to make its ideas practical and engaging. It is 2:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. The pale, synthetic glow of your smartphone screen cuts through the absolute darkness of your bedroom, casting long, harsh shadows against the far wall. The house is completely silent, save for the low, rhythmic hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the sound of your own shallow breathing. You should be asleep. In fact, you desperately need to be asleep. In exactly 5.5 hours, your alarm is going to ring. And tomorrow is not just another day. Tomorrow is the day you have been working toward for 6 months. It is the final presentation for a career-defining project, the kind of opportunity that shifts the trajectory of your entire professional life. Or perhaps tomorrow's the day you are finally launching the small business you have been quietly building in your garage. Or maybe it is something far more intimate. Tomorrow you are meeting the family of the person you have been dating, someone who is genuinely, terrifyingly good for you. Everything in your life is perfectly aligned. The path forward is clear. The universe, after years of struggle, has finally handed you the exact opportunity you have been begging for on your knees. And yet here you are in the dark, watching yourself systematically tear it apart. You are endlessly, frantically scrolling through a digital timeline of videos you do not care about, images of strangers you will never meet, and articles you will never remember. Your eyes burn, your mind is a foggy, exhausted mess. You are intentionally draining your cognitive battery, ensuring with mathematical precision that you will wake up tomorrow morning completely depleted, irritable, and unprepared. Or perhaps your specific brand of destruction is different. Perhaps you are not scrolling. Perhaps you just opened a text message thread with that new, incredibly healthy, loving partner. And out of nowhere, fueled by a sudden, inexplicable tightness in your chest, you type out a sharp, accusatory, completely unnecessary message. You pick a fight over a profoundly trivial misunderstanding from 3 days ago. You watch your own thumbs type the destructive words. You hover over the send button. A quiet, rational voice in the back of your mind is screaming, "Do not do this. They are good to you. Everything is fine. Put the phone down and go to sleep." But the voice is faint, drowned out by a much louder, darker, heavier compulsion. You press send. The message vanishes into the digital ether. Instantly, the peace of the night shatters. The fight begins. The anxiety spikes. The relationship fractures. In both scenarios, the underlying feeling is identical. It feels as though you are a hostage in your own physical body. You are sitting bound and gagged in the backseat of a car, screaming at the driver to hit the brakes, but the driver just stares blankly ahead, pressing their foot harder and harder onto the gas pedal, steering you deliberately and precisely toward the edge of the cliff. When the sun finally comes up, the damage is fully realized. The alarm clock blares, a violent intrusion into your restless 2-hour sleep. You wake up with a heavy, deeply familiar ache settling in the exact center of your chest. It is a cocktail of exhaustion, profound regret, and a quiet, corrosive shame. You drag yourself out of bed. The meeting goes poorly because your mind is clouded with sleep deprivation. Your answers are slow, and your charisma is dead. The presentation you rehearse so flawlessly in your living room comes out disjointed and hollow. You leave the boardroom knowing you left your potential on the table. If it was the relationship, the morning is spent in a toxic, icy silence. You introduced chaos where there was only stability, and now the person who was ready to love you is looking at you with caution, building a wall to protect themselves from your unpredictable spikes of hostility. And as you sit in your car at the end of the day, gripping the leather steering wheel, staring blankly at the red taillights of the traffic in front of you, the rain beginning to spit against the windshield, you ask yourself the most punishing, agonizing, and universally human question in existence. Why? Why do I do this to myself? Why do I relentlessly, efficiently destroy my own progress exactly at the moment things start to get good? This is the dark, silent, agonizing reality of self-sabotage. It is the silent arsonist that lives inside your own mind. It is a phantom entity that resides in the basement of your psychology. It waits patiently while you work, while you struggle, while you build. It waits until you have finally constructed something beautiful, a fragile bridge to a better future, a stable morning routine, a moment of profound emotional peace, a successful career milestone. And then, in the dead of night, when your conscious defenses are lowered, it quietly walks up to the bridge, pours gasoline over the wood, and lights the match. The immediate biological instinct after watching your own life burn is to attack your own character. You lean your head against the steering wheel, the sound of the rain amplifying the silence in the car, and you ruthlessly diagnose yourself with a fatal, incurable character flaw. You tell yourself that you are fundamentally broken. You look in the rearview mirror and decide that you are simply lazy. You convince yourself that you lack the genetic component of discipline that successful people possess. You weave a dark, absolute narrative about your own identity. I am just toxic. I am someone who ruins things. I am inherently unworthy of happiness, and this is the universe proving it to me once again. And because you believe that you are broken, you look for a way to fix yourself using the only method the modern world has taught you. You attempt to gather more data. You assume that you failed because you simply didn't know enough. If you just had the right framework, the right strategy, the right perfectly optimized routine, you wouldn't have self-sabotage. So you retreat into the comfortable, sterile safety of information consumption. You go home, open your laptop, and buy an expensive, leather-bound productivity planner. You download 3 new habit tracking applications. You listen to a 3-hour podcast featuring a neuroscientist explaining the exact dopamine pathways of high performers. You read best-selling books on relationship attachment styles, highlighting paragraphs in neon yellow. You build an incredibly complex, color-coded spreadsheet outlining your new life plan. For a few days, you feel a massive rush of relief. You feel powerful. You feel like you are doing the work. But deep down, in the quietest, most honest corner of your mind, you already know the terrifying truth. More information is not the solution. You are drowning in a vast ocean of information. If a lack of knowledge were the bottleneck to your happiness, you would have solved this problem a decade ago. You already know exactly what a healthy relationship looks like. You have read the books. You know exactly how to prepare for a crucial meeting. You have the skills. You know that going to sleep at 10 p.m. yields better results than scrolling until 3 a.m. You do not possess an information deficit. You possess an execution deficit. And the endless consumption of data, the planning, the researching, the podcast listening, is not actual progress. It is a highly sophisticated, socially acceptable form of psychological avoidance. You are using preparation as a shield against action. You are meticulously researching the exact structural mechanics of the bridge while actively standing on it with a lit match in your hand. To understand why you repeatedly burn down your own life, you have to stop staring at the ashes of your failed attempts, and you must start investigating the arsonist. We must slow down the tape of your life. We must look at the microscopic, physiological moment just before the sabotage begins. We have to examine the trigger. Think back to the hours before you sent that destructive text message, or the afternoon before you began the midnight scroll that ruined your presentation. What were you actually feeling in your body? If you strip away the narrative and are brutally, uncomfortably honest with yourself, you are not feeling depressed. You are not feeling angry. You are not feeling overwhelmed by tragedy. You were feeling good. Perhaps you were feeling a moment of genuine, uninterrupted peace sitting on the couch with your partner. Perhaps you were feeling the terrifying, electric thrill of impending success because your project was flawless. You were standing directly on the threshold of a completely new identity. You were about to transition from the person who struggles to the person who succeeds. You were about to transition from the person who is always heartbroken to the person who is deeply, securely loved. And that exact beautiful feeling of impending joy is precisely what triggered the massive biological alarm in your brain. We operate under a profound, universal, and incredibly dangerous illusion about human nature. We believe with absolute certainty that human beings fundamentally want to be happy. We believe that our nervous systems are perfectly designed to seek peace, joy, expansion, and success. They are not. Your nervous system was not designed by a philosopher seeking enlightenment. It was shaped by millions of years of brutal, unforgiving evolutionary biology, and it has been heavily programmed by the specific, often painful history of your own childhood and past traumas. Your nervous system does not care about your happiness. It does not care about your career goals. It does not care if you find your soulmate. Your nervous system cares about exactly one thing: survival. And to your primitive, ancient brain, survival is deeply, inextricably tethered to one specific condition: familiarity. The brain equates the known with safety and the unknown with lethal danger. It does not matter if the known is miserable, painful, or toxic. If you survived it yesterday, the brain calculates that you can survive it today. Now apply this cold biological reality to your own life history. If you have spent your entire life operating in a state of high stress, constant anxiety, and emotional chaos, if your baseline was built on navigating conflict in your childhood home, or enduring the frantic energy of barely scraping by financially, or surviving a string of toxic, dramatic relationships, then chaos is what your body recognizes as home. Your nervous system is a master of navigating the storm. It knows how to dodge the lightning. It knows how to swim in the turbulent waters of crisis. But peace? Peace is not your home. Peace is an alien planet. Peace is a terrifying, vast, unmapped territory where you have no survival skills. So when things finally start going well in your life, when the drama suddenly disappears, when the success is right in front of you and the person sitting next to you genuinely loves you without conditions, you do not feel joy. You feel a sudden, terrifying spike of existential panic. You experience an upper limit problem. You have an internal, invisible thermostat setting for how much happiness, success, and love you are neurologically permitted to tolerate before the system overloads. When you exceed that limit, the oxygen in the room suddenly feels thin. The profound silence of a healthy, non-combative relationship feels deafening and suspicious. The stability of professional success feels like an elaborate trap waiting to spring. Your nervous system detects this unfamiliar, agonizing peace, scans its historical database, finds no record of how to survive in this environment, and sounds a massive, silent biological alarm. Danger, the primitive brain whispers urgently in the dark. This is unknown territory. We do not know the rules here. We do not know how to survive in a state of joy. We are masters of the crisis. We know how to survive a disaster. We must return to the crisis immediately to regain control. And so the phantom puppeteer reaches for the strings. You pick the fight over the text message. You drink the extra 3 glasses of wine you swore you wouldn't touch. You stay awake until 4 a.m. watching meaningless videos. You blow off the important meeting. You eat the food that makes you sick. You do not do these things because you are weak or stupid or fundamentally flawed. You do them because they are highly effective, historically proven mechanisms to rapidly introduce the familiar chaos back into your life. Self-sabotage is a tool of emotional regulation. Look at the mechanics of what happens immediately after you ruin the opportunity. The sudden rush of disappointment, the sharp sting of failure, the heavy blanket of shame. It feels terrible, yes, but it also feels incredibly deeply familiar. The unbearable tension of the unknown peace in your chest finally relaxes. The heavy shoe has finally dropped, and you are the one who dropped it, which means you retain control. You are back in the familiar neighborhood of your own suffering. You know exactly how to be the victim of your own life. You know the exact, well-rehearsed script for apologizing, for feeling guilty, for beating yourself up, and for promising to start over from zero on Monday. You have successfully restored your emotional baseline. The arsonist burned the new house down so you could go back to living in the familiar ashes of the old one. This realization requires a tectonic shift in how you view yourself. Self-sabotage is not a sign that you are broken. It is not an enemy entity trying to destroy you out of malice. Self-sabotage is a twisted, profoundly misguided mechanism of self-protection. It is your unconscious mind acting like a terrified, overzealous bodyguard. It is desperately pulling you back into the uncomfortable, painful reality you know, solely to protect you from the terrifying, magnificent, uncontrollable unknown of the reality you actually desire. It is the physical, behavioral manifestation of your deepest internal conflict. It is a violent, silent war fought in the theater of your own daily routines. It is the friction between the visionary person you are desperately trying to become and the terrified, traumatized person you are deeply afraid to stop being. You cannot become the new version of yourself without allowing the old version to die, and the ego is terrified of death. It will fight with every weapon it has: procrastination, addiction, anger, avoidance, to keep the old identity alive. For years, you have been looking at your life and wondering why the universe keeps placing these massive, immovable, unfair obstacles in your path. You have built entire narratives to explain your lack of progress. You blame the macroeconomic climate for your business failing. You blame your upbringing and your parents for your emotional volatility. You blame the toxic people from your past for your inability to trust. You blame bad timing, bad luck, and a lack of resources. You look out at the horizon of your future, and you see a massive, jagged, imposing mountain completely blocking the sun. You have spent years walking in circles around the base of this mountain. You have set up camp in its shadow. You have complained endlessly to anyone who will listen about its steep, unforgiving cliffs. You have spent thousands of hours and dollars researching the absolute best, most technologically advanced climbing gear. You have sat in the mud, staring at the peak, waiting for a savior, a mentor, or a helicopter to come and miraculously lift you over it. You have believed that your life would finally begin once the mountain was moved. But today, standing in the cold air, the dense fog of your own self-deception is finally beginning to clear. You stand at the base looking up at the imposing stone, and a chilling, breathtaking realization washes over you, freezing the blood in your veins. You look closely at the rocks. You look at the texture of the cliffs. The rocks are not made of external circumstances. They are made of your own carefully crafted excuses. The steep, impassable cliffs are carved from your own outdated childhood defense mechanisms. The avalanche waiting to crush you is composed of your own repressed anger, your unexpressed grief, and your paralyzing fear of vulnerability. There is no external enemy. There is no bad timing. The universe is not conspiring against you. You look at the obstacle, and the obstacle is looking right back at you. It has your eyes. It has your voice. The mountain is you. You are the barrier. You are the architect of the friction. You are the arsonist, and you are the burning house. And the terrifying, magnificent beauty of this realization is that it instantly, violently strips away every single comforting illusion you have ever held. It removes the warm blanket of victimhood. If the mountain is you, then nobody is coming to move it for you. You cannot blame the stone for being heavy when you are the one generating its mass. You cannot read another book to make it magically disappear. You cannot meditate it away in a weekend retreat. You cannot outsmart it by buying a better productivity planner. The presence of the mountain is not an error in the code of your life. It is the exact curriculum you must master. The mountain is the physical manifestation of the gap between who you are and who you need to be. It is the culmination of every unhealed wound, every avoided truth, and every self-sabotaging behavior you have accumulated over a lifetime. To conquer the mountain, you must conquer yourself. You must learn how to dismantle the arsonist. You must learn how to sit in the terrifying, oxygen-thin atmosphere of peace and success without reaching for the match. You must learn to expand your internal capacity to tolerate joy without triggering the biological panic alarm. You understand the architecture of your own destruction now. You see the phantom puppeteer. You feel the familiar, heavy, magnetic pull of your old chaos trying to drag you back to the comfortable bottom. You see the arsonist standing there. You understand why it holds a match. You understand now, but you still need to act. Clarity is not completion. Recognizing the mountain does not transport you to the summit. It merely shows you the staggering scale of the climb. The wind is howling through the jagged rocks of your own resistance. The stone is cold, unforgiving, and deeply familiar. The peak is still hidden in the heavy clouds of the unknown. You can no longer pretend you do not see it. You can no longer blame the weather. You can no longer retreat to the safety of the camp and pretend you are preparing. The mountain is waiting. And the very first step, The agonizing, ego-shattering step of taking absolute responsibility for your own elevation is resting right beneath your foot. The architecture of avoidance, decoding the invisible scripts of sabotage. Based on the book The Mountain is You and adapted into a narrative format to make its ideas practical and engaging. You are standing in the middle of a grocery store aisle on a Wednesday evening. The harsh fluorescent lights hum above you, casting an unflattering clinical glow over thousands of brightly colored packages. People are moving past you, pushing metal carts with a dull, rhythmic clatter. A voice over the intercom is announcing a discount on citrus fruits. The physical reality of your environment is completely, painfully mundane. But internally, you are nowhere near this grocery store. Internally, you are fighting a massive, exhausting, invisible war. You are staring blankly at a row of pasta sauces, but your mind is rapidly cycling through a Rolodex of anxieties. You are replaying an awkward interaction you had with a colleague 5 hours ago, forensically dissecting the tone of their voice. You are simultaneously projecting yourself 3 weeks into the future, anticipating a financial stressor that has not yet materialized. You are feeling a vague, heavy guilt about an email you haven't answered, a project you haven't started, and a workout you skipped. You stand there for a full 3 minutes, holding a jar of marinara sauce, completely paralyzed by the sheer crushing weight of your own cognitive load. When you finally snap out of it, place the jar in your basket, and walk toward the registers, you feel a profound sense of physical exhaustion. It is a bone-deep weariness that 8 hours of sleep never seems to cure. This exhaustion is not the byproduct of hard work. It is the metabolic cost of running a dozen invisible, self-sabotaging scripts in the background of your mind, 24 hours a day. In our previous session, we identified the silent arsonist. We looked at the terrifying reality that you are the one burning down your own progress, pulling the alarm the moment you step into the unfamiliar territory of peace or success. We realized that self-sabotage is not a character flaw, but a deeply misguided mechanism of self-protection. But understanding the arsonist's motive is only the first step. To survive the climb, you must learn to read the arsonist's blueprints. You must become a master of pattern recognition. When a complex piece of machinery, a car engine, an industrial generator, a computer server, is about to fail, it rarely explodes without warning. It emits signals, a subtle vibration in the steering wheel, a faint, acrid smell of burning rubber, a microscopic drop in oil pressure, a flashing check engine light. If a mechanic knows the patterns, they can prevent the catastrophe. The human nervous system operates on the exact same principle. When you are about to sabotage your life, your psychology emits highly predictable, historically ingrained signals. But because you have never been taught to read your own diagnostic dashboard, you ignore the flashing lights until the engine completely seizes on the highway. Self-sabotage does not arrive dressed as a villain. It does not announce itself with a sinister laugh. If it did, you would easily defeat it. Instead, self-sabotage disguises itself as virtue. It masquerades as responsibility, as high standards, as empathy, and as rational planning. It weaves itself into the very fabric of your personality until you can no longer tell the difference between who you are and the armor you're wearing. Let us dissect the matrix. Let us slow down the tape of your daily life and drag the 4 great invisible patterns of avoidance out of the shadows and into the harsh, unforgiving light. Pattern 1. The illusion of the flawless execution. You are sitting at your desk. The cursor on your blank screen is blinking with a steady, rhythmic, almost mocking pulse. You are trying to write something important. A business proposal, a creative project, a difficult email that requires vulnerability. You type a sentence, you look at it, you feel a sudden, sharp spike of dissatisfaction in your chest. The sentence is clumsy. It doesn't accurately capture the brilliance of the idea in your head. So you delete it. You type another sentence. You delete that one too. You decide that the problem is not the sentence, but the environment. You adjust your chair. You go to the kitchen to brew exactly 1 more cup of perfectly temperature-controlled coffee. You return to the desk. You change the font. You adjust the margins. You spend 45 minutes researching a tangential piece of data that you do not actually need, convincing yourself that you are being thorough. 3 hours pass. The page is still blank. The project remains unfinished. If someone were to ask you why you haven't launched the business, published the work, or sent the proposal, you would have a beautiful, highly respectable defense ready. I just have very high standards, you would say, your voice carrying a note of quiet pride. I am a perfectionist. I refuse to put something out into the world with my name on it unless it is absolutely flawless. I am just committed to excellence. It sounds noble. It sounds like the trait of a high achiever. But let us strip away the romantic narrative and look at the raw psychological data beneath it. Perfectionism is not a commitment to excellence. Perfectionism is the ultimate, most socially acceptable form of high-functioning cowardice. It is a brilliant, devastating pattern of self-sabotage disguised as a virtue. Look closely at the mechanics of perfectionism. Why does the brain demand that the project be flawless before it sees the light of day? Because your brain, that ancient, primitive survival machine, understands a fundamental law of human social dynamics. If a project is never finished, it can never be judged. If it can never be judged, it can never be criticized. And if you are never criticized, you can never be rejected. Perfectionism is not about the quality of the work. It is an intricate emotional shield designed to protect your fragile ego from the agonizing vulnerability of being seen as a beginner, being seen as average, or being seen as a failure. You are using the impossible standard of perfect as an impenetrable fortress. You sit inside this fortress, safe from the arrows of public opinion, clutching your unexecuted ideas. You get to maintain the intoxicating fantasy that you are a genius whose masterpiece is simply in development. As long as the book remains unwritten, it is a brilliant, world-changing bestseller in your mind. As long as the business remains a business plan on a hard drive, it is a billion-dollar unicorn. The moment you actually execute, the moment you step into the arena and publish the messy, flawed, imperfect reality of your work, the fantasy dies. You collide with the brutal friction of the real world. You expose yourself to the very real possibility that your work is currently mediocre. Your nervous system is terrified of that mediocrity. It equates average performance with social exile. So it runs the perfectionist script. It tells you to research just a little bit more. It tells you the font isn't right. It paralyzes you with the illusion of high standards, successfully ensuring that you never take the risks that could actually change your life. You are not paralyzed because you are a master craftsman demanding excellence. You are paralyzed because you are a terrified human being who would rather guarantee their own failure through inaction than risk the possibility of failure through effort. The perfectionist pattern is a dead end on the mountain. You will spend your entire life polishing your climbing boots at base camp, entirely convinced you are making progress, while everyone else, covered in mud and making mistakes, slowly ascends to the peak. Pattern 2, the anesthesia of the mundane. It is 5:31 p.m. You unlock the front door of your home, step inside, and drop your keys into the ceramic bowl in the hallway. The door clicks shut behind you, sealing you off from the demands of the world. The house is quiet. For the first time in 10 hours, nobody is asking anything of you. There are no emails demanding a response. There are no colleagues requiring your attention. There is just you, the dimming light of the early evening, and the absolute echoing silence of your own living room. And in that exact fraction of a second, before you even have time to take off your coat, a profound visceral feeling of panic begins to rise in your throat. It is not a loud panic. It is a quiet, creeping dread. The silence of the house does not feel peaceful. It feels violently oppressive. It feels like a vacuum that is threatening to suck all the air out of your lungs. Within exactly 3 seconds of entering the quiet house, your hand moves autonomously. It reaches into your pocket, pulls out your smartphone, and your thumb swipes open a social media feed. Or you walk directly to the kitchen, open the refrigerator, and begin mindlessly eating something you do not even want. Or you grab the remote control and turn on the television, not to watch a specific program, but simply to fill the room with artificial noise. Or you pour a glass of wine, telling yourself it's to take the edge off a long day. You do this so automatically, so seamlessly, that it barely registers as a conscious decision. This is the pattern of the numb. It is the most pervasive, invisible epidemic of self-sabotage in the modern world. We tend to think of numbing only in its extreme, dramatic forms, clinical addiction to alcohol, drugs, or gambling. But the arsonist is far more subtle than that. The arsonist prefers microdosing anesthesia. Why do you have such a violent, immediate aversion to the quiet? Why must you constantly have a podcast playing in your ears while you wash the dishes? Why must you scroll through a screen while you brush your teeth? Why can you not sit in an empty room for 10 minutes without feeling like your skin is crawling? Because the silence is dangerous. When the external noise of the world finally stops, the internal noise begins. In the silence, the psychological debris you have been running from all day, all year, perhaps your entire life, begins to surface. In the silence, the unhealed grief over a past relationship demands to be felt. In the silence, the creeping realization that you are profoundly unfulfilled in your career begins to knock on the door of your consciousness. In the silence, the quiet, terrifying voice of your true intuition tries to tell you that the life you are living is not the life you actually want. Your nervous system, obsessed solely with keeping you safe from pain, detects these uncomfortable emotions rising to the surface. It recognizes the threat. Feeling your own pain is metabolically expensive and deeply uncomfortable. So the brain immediately searches for a pacifier. It searches for a state change. It demands a distraction heavy enough to push the rising emotions back down into the dark. The endless scrolling, the binge watching, the chronic overeating, the compulsive need to stay busy, these are not hobbies. These are not ways to relax. They are highly engineered, incredibly effective forms of emotional Novocaine. They deliver a rapid, cheap hit of synthetic dopamine that temporarily anesthetizes the discomfort. You scroll through the timeline, and for 45 minutes, you do not have to think about the fact that your marriage is failing. You eat the junk food, and the physical sensation of fullness temporarily masks the deep, psychological sensation of emptiness. You keep yourself scheduled down to the minute with trivial tasks, so you can fall into bed exhausted, completely avoiding the terrifying act of self-reflection. You are using the mundane to numb the profound. But here is the brutal, unforgiving physics of emotional numbing. You cannot selectively numb emotion. When you inject Novocaine into your jaw at the dentist, you don't just stop feeling the pain of the drill. You stop feeling everything in that area. The same is true of your psychology. When you use distraction, food, or screens to numb your anxiety, your grief, and your fear, you are simultaneously necessarily numbing your capacity to feel joy, gratitude, passion, and genuine connection. You flatten your entire emotional waveform. You turn your vibrant, technicolor life into a dull, gray, buzzing static. This is how the arsonist destroys you. It doesn't kill you in a dramatic explosion. It slowly puts you to sleep. It convinces you that surviving the day without feeling anything is a victory. You are not relaxing. You are actively burying yourself alive under a mountain of trivial distractions, terrified of the beautiful, painful, magnificent truth of what you would find if you finally stopped running and allowed yourself to feel the cold wind of the climb. Pattern 3, the armor of the martyr. It is 11:30 p.m. You are exhausted. You have an early morning presentation tomorrow, and you know you need to sleep. Your phone vibrates on the nightstand. The caller ID flashes the name of a close friend or a family member. You know exactly what this call is about. This person is perpetually in crisis. They are always navigating a dramatic breakup, a financial disaster, or a conflict with a coworker. They never take your advice, they never change their behavior, but they always call you when the building is on fire. Your body begs you to ignore the call, turn off the phone, and go to sleep. But you cannot. A deep, powerful compulsion overrides your exhaustion. You swipe to answer. For the next 2 hours, you sit in the dark, patiently listening to their drama. You offer brilliant, empathetic advice. You analyze their situation with the precision of a therapist. You soothe their anxiety. You absorb their toxic energy, filtering it through your own nervous system, acting as a human emotional sponge. When you finally hang up at 1:30 a.m., you are completely drained. But strangely, beneath the exhaustion, there is a subtle, intoxicating hum of satisfaction. You feel noble. You feel indispensable. You feel like the strong friend, the reliable rock in a chaotic universe, the savior. You go to sleep believing you have done a good selfless deed. But let us bring the investigating architect into the room. Let us look at the structural reality of what just happened, stripped of the romantic narrative of your own martyrdom. If you look closely at your life, a terrifying pattern emerges. You are brilliant at solving everyone else's problems. You can see the fatal flaws in your sister's relationship from a mile away. You know exactly what your best friend needs to do to get a promotion. You are the ultimate strategist, the fixer, the crisis manager for everyone in your orbit. And yet your own life is a stagnant, unexamined mess. Your own career is stalling. Your own boundaries are non-existent. Your own health is deteriorating. You have a mountain of unread emails, a list of unmet personal goals, and a profound, quiet loneliness that you refuse to acknowledge. This is the pattern of the martyr. It is one of the most sophisticated, deceptive, and dangerous forms of self-sabotage in human psychology. Why do we pour so much of our vital, limited energy into fixing the lives of others while our own lives fall apart? Because fixing other people is the ultimate distraction from facing the terrifying reality of our own mountain. It is an incredibly clever psychological sleight of hand. As long as you are hip-deep in the drama, trauma, and chaos of the people around you, you have a culturally sanctioned, morally unassailable excuse to completely ignore your own life. I couldn't possibly work on my business plan this weekend, you tell yourself. My friend is going through a terrible divorce. They need me. I have to be there for them. You use their crises as a shield against your own potential. But the secondary payoff of the martyr pattern is even more insidious. It is an ego trip disguised as humility. When you are the fixer, you are inherently positioning yourself in a place of superiority. You are the healthy one. They are the broken one. You are the wise one. They are the confused one. By surrounding yourself with people who constantly need to be rescued, you guarantee that you never have to feel inferior. You never have to face the terrifying vulnerability of being around people who challenge you to grow, because people who challenge you do not need you to save them. You build your entire identity around being indispensable to broken people. But consider the tragic physics of this arrangement. If your identity is built on rescuing people, what happens if they actually get better? What happens if they heal, learn to set boundaries, and no longer need your midnight crisis management? Your ego panics. You would lose your utility. You would lose your sense of self. So, unconsciously, you keep toxic, draining, chaotic people in your life. You enable their bad behavior. You offer endless advice that you know they won't take, keeping the loop of dependency perfectly intact. You are a co-conspirator in their dysfunction because their dysfunction is the exact drug you use to numb your own pain. You are not being selfless. You are using other people's emergencies as a hiding place. The arsonist loves the martyr. The arsonist knows that as long as you are busy fighting fires in everyone else's house, you will never notice that your own house has quietly burned to the foundation. You will spend your entire life at the base of your mountain, pointing out the best climbing routes to other people, while your own boots never touch the stone. Pattern 4. The hallucination of the overthinker. It is 10 a.m. on a Thursday. You are sitting in a meeting, but you are not really there. Your eyes are open, you are nodding occasionally, but the entirety of your cognitive processing power is trapped inside a simulation running in your own head. You have to have a difficult conversation with a client tomorrow. Or perhaps you need to set a boundary with your mother this weekend. Instead of preparing your notes and moving on, your brain has hijacked the event. You are currently running the simulation of this future conversation for the 47th time today. You script what you are going to say, then you predict what they will say in response. You anticipate their anger. You formulate a brilliant, razor-sharp rebuttal. You imagine them storming out of the room. You imagine the catastrophic fallout, losing the client, getting fired, losing your house, ending up destitute. You spin the scenario out to its absolute, most extreme, apocalyptic conclusion. As you sit in the meeting, your physical body begins to react to this phantom scenario. Your heart rate accelerates, your palms sweat, a heavy knot forms in your stomach. Your adrenal glands pump cortisol into your bloodstream. You are exhausted, tense, and furious at the client for a conversation that has not actually happened, and statistically will never happen. This is the pattern of the overthinker. It is the arsonist's most brilliant intellectual trap. We live in a culture that worships the intellect. We believe that thinking is the ultimate problem-solving tool. Therefore, we assume that if we just think about a problem long enough, deeply enough, and from enough angles, we will magically resolve it. But overthinking is not problem-solving. Overthinking is the act of creating problems that do not exist, to avoid facing the reality of the problems that do. Let us look at the deep architecture of anxiety and rumination. Why does the brain obsessively simulate the worst-case scenario over and over again? Why do we torture ourselves with phantom disasters? Because the primitive brain operates on a profound, flawed logic regarding trauma. It believes that if it can anticipate every possible catastrophic outcome, it will not be surprised when the catastrophe arrives. And if it is not surprised, it will not be hurt. Overthinking is an attempt to control the uncontrollable future through the sheer brute force of mental rehearsal. You believe that by worrying about the meeting, you are somehow preparing for it. You believe that by obsessing over the potential failure of your relationship, you are protecting your heart from being broken. But this is a devastating hallucination. Worrying does not strip tomorrow of its sorrow. It only strips today of its joy. Worrying does not prepare you for the worst. It simply forces you to experience the worst-case scenario vividly, biologically, and repeatedly before it even happens. Your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. When a zebra is chased by a lion on the savannah, its cortisol spikes, it runs for its life. And if it escapes, the cortisol clears its system within minutes. The zebra goes back to eating grass, completely at peace. When you sit at your desk and imagine your boss firing you, your cortisol spikes just like the zebra's. But because the line is in your head, you can never outrun it. You just sit there marinating in a toxic bath of stress hormones for hours, fighting a phantom predator. This is an astronomical waste of metabolic energy. You drain your daily battery fighting ghosts. By the time you actually have to face the real world, by the time you actually sit down for the real conversation with the client, you are already completely exhausted, highly reactive, and operating from a place of deep defensiveness. You guarantee the failure you were so desperate to avoid because you exhausted yourself in the rehearsal. Overthinking is a brilliantly disguised form of avoidance. Thinking feels like doing. When you spend 3 hours pacing around your living room analyzing why your ex-partner left you, you feel like you are doing emotional work. You feel like you are being productive. But you are not doing anything. You are in a rocking chair, moving frantically back and forth, using tremendous energy, but traveling absolutely nowhere. The arsonist uses overthinking to paralyze you. As long as you are trapped in the labyrinth of your own mind, desperately trying to solve the puzzle of the future, you never have to take the single, terrifying, vulnerable step forward into the reality of the present moment. The Matrix revealed. You are sitting in the quiet of your room, or the driver's seat of your car, or the chair at your desk. The tape has been slowed down. The invisible architecture has been dragged into the light. You look at the perfectionist, demanding an impossible standard to protect you from the pain of judgment. You look at the numb, mindlessly scrolling and consuming to protect you from the terrifying silence of your own intuition. You look at the martyr, desperately fixing everyone else's life to protect you from the terrifying responsibility of fixing your own. You look at the overthinker, spinning apocalyptic fantasies to create the illusion of control in a chaotic universe. And as you look at these 4 towering pillars of self-sabotage, a profound, shattering realization washes over you. These patterns are not evidence that you are a terrible, broken, or irredeemable person. They are the exact opposite. They are evidence of an incredibly resilient, brilliant, adaptable nervous system that was trying desperately to keep you alive. Every single one of these self-sabotaging patterns was, at some point in your past, a highly effective survival strategy. When you were a child in an unpredictable or hypercritical environment, perfectionism might have been the only way you could secure love and avoid punishment. It was a brilliant strategy for a child. When you experienced a trauma that was too massive for your young brain to process, emotional numbing was a biological necessity. It kept you from shattering. It was a brilliant strategy. When you grew up in a chaotic family dynamic, becoming the fixer and hyper-vigilantly anticipating disasters, overthinking, might have been the only way to maintain a semblance of safety in your home. You built this armor to survive a war, and it worked. You survived. But here is the tragedy of the human condition. The war ended a long time ago. The critical environment of your childhood is gone. The chaotic family dynamic is in the past. You are no longer a helpless child navigating a dangerous landscape. You are an adult with agency, power, and options. But you are still wearing the heavy iron armor of your survival trauma. You are walking through the peaceful, beautiful reality of your current life, wearing a suit of iron designed for a war zone. The armor is so heavy that you cannot run. The helmet is so thick that you cannot see the opportunities in front of you. The gauntlets are so rigid that you cannot feel the warmth of the people who are trying to love you. Your self-sabotage is simply misguided self-love. It is the primitive part of your brain trying to protect you from a threat that no longer exists, using a strategy that is now destroying the very life you are trying to build. This realization is the turning point. It is the moment you see the matrix. You understand now why you hit the snooze button. You understand why you pick the fights. You understand the exact mechanism of your own avoidance. You see the strings attached to your own wrists, leading up into the dark canopy of your conditioning. You possess the ultimate clarity. You have recognized the pattern. But as you sit there feeling the profound weight of this new understanding, the air in the room suddenly feels very thin. The thrill of the epiphany begins to fade, replaced by a cold, heavy, terrifying dread. Because you suddenly realize the most brutal truth of human psychology. Knowing the pattern does not break the pattern. Seeing the bars of the cage does not magically open the door. Understanding exactly why the arsonist holds the match does not extinguish the flame. You have mapped the terrain of your own dysfunction. You have stared directly at the mountain, and you know every jagged rock is carved from your own history. You see the path. You understand now. But you still need to act. The patterns are waiting. The triggers are already set for tomorrow morning. The phone will ring. The project will demand execution. The silence will descend upon the house. The primitive brain will sound the alarm. The architecture is exposed, but the gravity remains. And the terrible, beautiful burden of agency is resting entirely on your shoulders. The crucible of the self, the agony of the in-between. Based on the book, The Mountain is You, and adapted into a narrative format to make its ideas practical and engaging. It is 8 a.m. on a Saturday morning. The house is entirely yours. The weekend stretches out before you, an expansive, unwritten canvas of pure, uninterrupted time. There are no urgent emails flooding your inbox. There is no brutal commute to endure. There are no sudden demands from a manager, no mandatory meetings, no artificial deadlines imposed by the corporate machinery of your weekday life. You are, for the next 48 hours, the absolute sovereign of your own existence. This is the exact moment you have been waiting for all week. All week, trapped in the rigid, exhausting architecture of your daily obligations, you have been whispering a desperate promise to yourself. When the weekend arrives, you said, "When I finally have some breathing room, I will do the deep work. I will start the business plan. I will have that difficult conversation with my partner. I will go for the long run. I will sit down and write." You believe that the only thing standing between your current, stagnant reality and your idealized, successful self was a lack of unallocated time. You believe that if you just had a few empty hours, the friction would magically disappear, the arsonist would sleep, and the better version of you would effortlessly take the stage. But now the time has arrived. The slate is entirely blank. You have poured a fresh cup of premium coffee. You have placed your laptop on the dining room table or your running shoes by the front door. The physical environment is perfectly, meticulously set. Furthermore, you are now armed with clarity. In our previous sessions, you learned to recognize the invisible patterns. You know exactly what the arsonist looks like. You have decoded the perfectionist, the numb, the martyr, and the overthinker. You have successfully dragged the phantom puppeteer out of the dark basement of your basal ganglia and into the harsh light of conscious awareness. You know exactly what you need to do. You know exactly how to do it. You know exactly why it is vitally important to your future. And yet you are completely, utterly, terrifyingly paralyzed. You sit in the chair, staring at the glowing, empty screen of your computer, or you stand in the hallway staring down at the running shoes, and a massive, invisible wall of pure, unadulterated psychological resistance rises up in front of you. It is not a subtle feeling. It is not a vague sense of reluctance. It is a dense, physical sensation. It sits heavy and cold in the absolute center of your chest. It tightens the microscopic muscles at the base of your neck. Your breathing becomes shallow and erratic. You feel a sudden, inexplicable wave of profound exhaustion wash over your entire body. A bone-deep lethargy, even though you just woke up from 8 hours of solid sleep. You are experiencing the absolute, violent peak of internal conflict. This is the dark, silent crucible of the self. It is the agonizing, liminal space between knowing exactly what to do and the physical act of actually executing it. And in this incredibly fragile, vulnerable moment, your own brain turns against you with astonishing, ruthless, highly intellectual sophistication. Suddenly, your mind begins to generate an avalanche of urgent, entirely fabricated priorities. You look at the blank document on your screen, and immediately your eyes dart to the kitchen. You notice a single, unwashed coffee mug resting in the sink. Suddenly, cleaning the entire kitchen becomes a matter of vital, undeniable, life or death importance. I cannot possibly work in a messy environment, the voice in your head reasons. The logic is smooth, calm, and incredibly persuasive. It sounds like wisdom. A cluttered physical space creates a cluttered mental space. It is actually highly productive and psychologically sound to organize the environment before engaging in deep cognitive work. I am not procrastinating. I am just preparing the space for maximum efficiency. So you stand up, you walk away from the table, you wash the mug, you wipe down the granite countertops with meticulous care. You sweep the floor. You rearrange the spices in the cabinet alphabetically. You water a plant that does not actually need watering. You are moving fast. Your heart rate is up. You feel a distinct sense of accomplishment. You feel productive. But this is not productivity. This is highly active, highly disguised procrastination. It is the sophisticated camouflage of pure fear. You are using the physical motion of cleaning to mask the psychological paralysis of avoiding the actual work. You are intentionally feeding yourself a microdose of fake accomplishment, the dopamine hit of a clean kitchen, to numb the sharp, agonizing pain of avoiding the real challenge. You are running on a treadmill, sweating profusely, convinced you are climbing the mountain when in reality, you haven't moved a single inch. When the kitchen is absolutely spotless and there is nothing left to arrange, nothing left to clean, nothing left to organize, you are forced to return to the chair. You sit down. The blank screen is still there, patiently waiting. The cursor blinks with a steady, metronomic, deeply judgmental rhythm. The resistance returns, hitting you even harder this time. Now the brain shifts tactics. It realizes that environmental distractions are no longer viable, so it moves to biological sabotage. Suddenly you feel a profound, overwhelming thirst. You must have a glass of ice water immediately. Then you realize the room is slightly too cold. The draft is distracting, so you need to spend 5 minutes finding the perfect sweater. Then, as you sit down again, you suddenly remember a long-form article you bookmarked 3 weeks ago about the geopolitical situation in Eastern Europe. Your brain brilliantly, flawlessly convinces you that understanding this complex macroeconomic context is somehow crucial to your personal development and worldview right at this exact second. I need to be an informed citizen before I can focus on my own goals, the inner voice rationalizes. You are caught in the suffocating grip of what behavioral psychologists call an extinction burst. To truly understand the agony of this internal conflict, you must understand what happens inside a biological system when an established, historically successful pattern of behavior is suddenly threatened with death. For years, perhaps decades, you have rigorously trained your nervous system to expect a very specific sequence of events on a Saturday morning. The historical script dictates that Saturday mornings are reserved for effortless, frictionless consumption, drinking coffee, watching television, endlessly scrolling through social media in a state of comfortable semi-consciousness, and avoiding anything that resembles difficult confrontational effort. That old script is deep. It is carved into the neural pathways of your brain like a massive canyon carved by a raging river over thousands of years. Today, you are attempting to dam the river. You are attempting to rewrite the foundational code of your behavior. You are actively, consciously denying your primitive brain its expected, automated hit of cheap dopamine. You are aggressively refusing to run the comfortable, energy-saving program that has kept you safe and numb for years. And the primitive brain panics. When a heavily reinforced behavior is suddenly denied its customary reward, the organism does not simply sigh, give up, and immediately adopt the new, healthier behavior. That is a toxic myth sold by motivational speakers who deal in platitudes. In visceral reality, the organism fights back, hard. The craving for the old habit spikes to unprecedented astronomical levels. The psychological discomfort intensifies until it feels like a physical pressure crushing your lungs. The brain screams, "Why aren't we running the script? Run the script. The system is failing. We are in danger. Abort the mission." This is the extinction burst. It is the frantic, desperate, violent escalation of the old habit right before it begins to die. It is the dying gasp of the arsonist. It feels like sheer agony. It feels like you are literally tearing your own skin off. The friction of sitting still, ignoring the phone, and focusing on the difficult task feels physically painful because your neurochemistry is in a state of active, open rebellion. You are essentially putting your own nervous system through acute withdrawal. You stare at the screen. You clench your fists until your knuckles turn white. The internal dialogue reaches a deafening, chaotic volume. The rational, visionary part of you, the architect, is desperately pleading. Just type one sentence. Just put on the shoes and walk out the door. Just dial the number. Just start. We know how to do this. We know the pattern. We can conquer the mountain. But the primitive, automated part of you, the phantom puppeteer, the arsonist, is launching a massive, coordinated counteroffensive. And because the arsonist lives inside your own mind, because it has access to your deepest memories, your darkest insecurities, and your most profound traumas, its arguments are incredibly tailored, deeply personal, and brutally effective. It stops negotiating about the temperature of the room or the cleanliness of the kitchen. It realizes those tactics are failing. So it strikes directly at the foundation of the conflict. It strikes directly at the core of your identity. Who are you trying to fool? The voice whispers in the dark, echoing theater of your mind. Look at yourself. You are not a writer. You are not an entrepreneur. You are not an athlete. You have never finished a significant project in your entire life. You are a chronic starter and a serial abandoner. Remember that business idea you had 3 years ago that failed miserably? Remember the guitar you bought that is currently collecting dust in the back of your closet? Remember how you ruined your last relationship? You are just going to fail again. And this time it is going to hurt worse because you actually tried. It is so much easier, so much safer to just close the laptop. Just pick up the phone, watch a movie, go back to sleep. Nobody is watching you. Nobody expects anything from you. Nobody actually cares if you climb the mountain. This is the true, hidden, radioactive core of the internal conflict. We often believe erroneously that our inability to execute our plans is simply a logistical problem. We think it is a problem of time management or a lack of motivation or a flaw in our strategy. We believe we just need a slightly better planner, a more aggressive morning routine, or a new productivity app. But beneath the surface of the sudden urge to clean the kitchen, beneath the biological cravings for digital distraction, beneath the manufactured exhaustion, lies a terrifying existential crisis of identity. Your habits are not just random things you do to pass the time. Your habits are the physical, repetitive, undeniable manifestation of who you fundamentally believe you are. They are the concrete evidence of your self-image. Every single time you hit the snooze button and skip the workout, you are casting a definitive vote for the identity of a person who is tired, weak, and lacks discipline. Every time you eat the junk food when you are stressed, you are casting a vote for the identity of a person who cannot handle their own emotional landscape without a chemical crutch. Every time you abandon a project when it reaches the phase of difficult friction, you are fiercely reinforcing the identity of a person who gives up. Over years and decades, these microscopic votes accumulate. They form a rigid, concrete, seemingly impenetrable foundation of self-belief. You build an entire psychological architecture around your own flaws. You create a deeply comfortable, highly familiar narrative about your own limitations. You say to yourself, I am just not a morning person. I just have a slow metabolism. I am just naturally an anxious person. I am just inherently a procrastinator. I am just someone who is bad with money. I am just someone who attracts toxic partners. These labels are incredibly destructive, yes, but we cling to them because they serve a profound, vital psychological purpose. They protect us from the unbearable pain of effort and the absolute terror of potential failure. If you truly believe at a cellular level that you are fundamentally incapable of change, that your flaws are genetic and immutable, then you are completely absolved of the terrifying responsibility to try. The label becomes a highly effective, bulletproof shield against the friction of life. You do not have to climb the mountain if you have diagnosed yourself as someone who cannot walk. But today, sitting at the table, staring at the blank screen, holding the pen, you are attempting to put down the shield. You are attempting to take a definitive action that directly, violently contradicts the identity you have spent a lifetime building. You are trying to act like a disciplined, focused, relentless creator. You are trying to act like someone who respects themselves. And your internal psychological immune system rejects this new behavior exactly like a biological immune system rejects a mismatched organ transplant. It attacks the new behavior because it feels intensely alien. It feels deeply fake. As you sit there trying to force your fingers to type the first paragraph of the business plan, or as you bend down to tie the laces of your running shoes, you are suddenly overwhelmed by a massive, suffocating, drowning wave of imposter syndrome. You feel utterly ridiculous. You feel like a small child wearing their parents' oversized clothes, stumbling around the house pretending to be an adult. The internal voice mocks you relentlessly, stripping away your dignity. Look at you, it sneers, trying to be an intellectual, trying to be a CEO, trying to be healthy. You don't belong here. This isn't you. You are an imposter. And the moment you step outside, the entire world is going to see exactly how fake you are. This is why the internal conflict of self-mastery is so deeply, profoundly agonizing. Changing a deeply ingrained habit is not simply a matter of changing a daily schedule. It is not a matter of swapping coffee for green tea. True transformation requires the slow, painful, deliberate assassination of your former self. To become the person who runs 5 miles every morning, the person who hits the snooze button and stays wrapped in the warm blankets has to die. To become the person who writes the book, the person who spends their weekends mindlessly consuming television, has to die. To become the person who commands respect in a relationship, the person who constantly compromises their own boundaries to beg for love, has to die. And the human ego is absolutely terrified of death, even the death of its most toxic, self-sabotaging, miserable traits. We cling desperately to our familiar suffering because it is known. It is mapped territory. We know the exact, specific contours of the guilt that follows a day of heavy procrastination. We know the exact, bitter taste of the shame that follows a broken promise to ourselves. We know how to navigate the fallout of a toxic argument. It is a miserable, dilapidated, burning neighborhood. But we know all the streets. We know all the hiding places. We know exactly how to survive there. Success, true discipline, and profound personal change, on the other hand, represent the terrifying, vast, unmapped wilderness of the unknown. If you actually sit down and write the brilliant chapter today, what happens next? The primitive brain calculates the terrifying trajectory of success. If you write a great chapter today, you will have to write the next chapter tomorrow. You will have to maintain the new higher standard. You will eventually have to publish it. People might read it. People might criticize it. Or worse, people might love it. And then you will have to become a public figure, and you will have to handle the pressure of expectations. If you stop sabotaging your relationships and finally allow yourself to be truly, securely loved, what happens next? You will have to let your walls down. You will have to be entirely vulnerable. And if they leave you after you have dropped your armor, the pain will be 1,000 times worse than the familiar pain of the toxic fights you usually start. You will have to face the ultimate, most terrifying possibility of all. The possibility that you actually are capable of greatness. Because if you are capable of greatness, if you actually have the power to climb the mountain, that means you have been actively, intentionally wasting your own potential for the last 10 years. The grief of that realization is enough to break a person in half. The fear of success is almost always far more paralyzing, far more deeply rooted than the fear of failure. Failure simply allows you to retreat into your comfortable, familiar, victimized identity. Failure is a warm blanket. You get to say, "See? I told you I couldn't do it. I told you the world was against me." Success is a spotlight. Success demands that you step out of the shadows, assume absolute, uncompromising responsibility for your own life, and become a completely different human being entirely. So sitting at the table, the war rages on. It is a silent, invisible, bloodless battle fought entirely within the dark confines of your own skull, but the stakes are literally your entire future. It is a battle for the steering wheel of your destiny. The arsonist is pulling every single string it has at its disposal. It is flooding your bloodstream with exhaustion. It is projecting vivid, high-definition cinematic images of your past failures onto the screen of your mind. It is tightening your chest with anxiety. And most dangerously, it is offering 1,000 perfectly rational, highly persuasive, incredibly gentle excuses to simply stand up, walk away, and try again tomorrow. Tomorrow, the voice whispers seductively, adopting the tone of a caring friend. Tomorrow will be better. You are just too stressed today. You didn't sleep well enough last night, and science says you need sleep to perform. The conditions simply aren't optimal. You need to do more research first. You need to clear your head. Just close the laptop. It's okay to practice self-care. Honoring your boundaries means knowing when to rest. You can start fresh with perfect energy on Monday. This is the great fatal illusion of tomorrow. We weaponize the language of therapy and self-care to justify our own avoidance. We confuse the necessary act of resting with the destructive act of quitting. Tomorrow is a magical, mythical, non-existent land where you possess infinite energy, unbreakable willpower, and zero internal friction. The version of you that exists in tomorrow is a flawless, highly motivated superhero who never gets tired and never feels fear. But tomorrow never actually arrives. You only ever wake up in the harsh, messy, unglamorous reality of today. And today is always tired. Today is always full of friction. Today is always inconvenient. If you surrender to the seductive voice of the arsonist now, the loop closes. The tension immediately dissolves. You will feel an instant, massive, euphoric rush of relief as you close the laptop, take off the running shoes, and turn on the television. The physical heaviness in your chest will vanish. The extinction burst will end instantly because you fed the beast exactly what it wanted, your surrender. But you know the physics of this transaction. You know it in your bones. That relief is a toxic, predatory loan. It is a high-interest debt taken out directly against your own self-respect. When the sun goes down tonight, when the temporary anesthesia of the distraction inevitably fades, the quiet, corrosive guilt will return, and it will be heavier, darker, and more suffocating than before. The fracture in your identity will widen. You will trust your own word a little bit less. The invisible walls of your self-constructed prison will grow a little bit thicker, a little bit higher. You know this. You have lived this exact agonizing cycle hundreds of times before. You carry the invisible scars of 1,000 broken Saturdays, 1,000 abandoned diets, 1,000 unwritten pages. You know that giving up is not an escape. It is just a temporary, cowardly delay of the inevitable, crushing pain of regret. You take a deep, trembling breath. You force your hands to remain resting on the keyboard. You actively refuse to look at the kitchen. You actively refuse to pick up the phone. You refuse to open a new browser tab to check the news. You refuse to run the old script. You sit perfectly, rigidly still in the absolute roaring center of the fire. You begin to observe the physical sensations of the resistance, just as you learn to observe the cues in your environment. You notice the tightness in your throat. You notice the frantic, hummingbird speed of your anxious thoughts. You notice the deep, primal, screaming desire to flee the room. You do not fight the feelings. You do not try to magically manifest a sense of manic motivation that you do not actually possess. You do not try to force yourself to feel happy about the work. You simply allow the violent friction to exist in your body without reacting to it. You become the observer of your own panic. You are learning the most difficult, the most counterintuitive, and the most profoundly liberating lesson of human behavior and self-mastery. The intense psychological pain you are feeling right now, the paralysis, the imposter syndrome, the overwhelming urge to quit, the manufactured exhaustion, is not a sign that you are doing something wrong. It is not a cosmic signal from the universe that you are broken or incapable or unsuited for the task at hand. It is the exact, precise opposite. The pain is the unmistakable, undeniable physical evidence that you are finally doing something right. The friction you feel is the literal friction of your old dying identity scraping violently against the birth of your new one. The mental exhaustion is the steep metabolic cost of forging brand new neural pathways in your brain in real time. The panic is the sound of the arsonist losing its iron grip on your behavior. You are not failing, you are transforming. And true transformation is an inherently violent, agonizing, messy process. It is a demolition before it is a construction. A snake does not shed its old skin comfortably. It must scrape itself against the hard rocks until the old skin tears away. A muscle does not grow larger without enduring the pain of microtears. A diamond is not formed in a gentle, comfortable breeze. It is forged under unimaginable, crushing pressure. You must fundamentally reframe the conflict. The resistance is not a brick wall designed to keep you out of the life you want. The resistance is a filter. It is a psychological toll booth designed to keep out the uncommitted, the weak-willed, and the tourists. It is the exact price you must pay to cross the bridge from who you were yesterday to who you are becoming today. If climbing the mountain were easy, if it didn't require shedding blood and ego on the rocks, it would not change your identity. The difficulty is not a bug in the system. The difficulty is the active ingredient. The struggle is the exact mechanism of your evolution. You look at the blinking cursor on the screen. It is no longer a judgment of your worth. It is no longer a taunt. It is simply a location in time and space. It is the designated point of impact. You understand now, with a cold, terrifying clarity, that you will never, ever feel fully ready. The mythical state of perfect motivation will never arrive to save you. The crushing weight of imposter syndrome will not magically disappear before you start the work. It will only quiet down after you have accumulated a massive mountain of undeniable physical evidence through your relentless actions. You cannot think your way into a new identity. You cannot analyze your way into a new identity. You cannot read enough self-help books, listen to enough podcasts, or attend enough therapy sessions to become a different person. Insight is entirely useless without action. You can only act your way into a new identity, one excruciatingly small, heavily resisted, profoundly uncomfortable choice at a time. The war is raging at full volume in your mind. The ghosts of your past failures are screaming for you to stop, warning you of the impending humiliation. The heavy, comforting gravity of your old habits is pulling relentlessly at your sleeves, begging you to come back to bed, back to the scroll, back to the numbness. You are standing on the very jagged edge of the precipice. You are caught violently between the warm, suffocating safety of the person you have always been and the terrifying, magnificent, brilliantly lit unknown of the person you could finally be. You still feel the fear. It is vibrating in your teeth. You still feel the crushing weight of the resistance. You still don't know exactly how the sentence will end, or if the business will succeed, or if the relationship will survive the truth. The arsonist is holding the match, waiting for you to surrender. But you place your fingers on the keys anyway. The Alchemy of Grief, the radical shift from conquest to integration. Based on the book The Mountain Is You, and adapted into a narrative format to make its ideas practical and engaging. It is the morning after the war. You wake up, open your eyes to the gray light filtering through the bedroom blinds, and the immediate, overwhelming sensation that greets you is a profound, echoing exhaustion. It is not the clean, satisfying physical fatigue of a long run or a hard day of manual labor. It is a deep psychological bruising. It is a bone-deep weariness that seems to emanate from your very marrow. It is the specific, heavy exhaustion that comes exclusively from fighting your own mind. Yesterday, you forced yourself to act. You sat in a chair, staring down the invisible wall of resistance. You ignored the frantic, desperate pleas of your basal ganglia, demanding a state change. You endured the agonizing extinction burst. You placed your fingers on the keys, or you laced up the shoes, or you made the difficult phone call, and you extracted a tiny, agonizing fraction of progress from the rigid stone of your old habits. You survived the skirmish. You did the hard thing. You conquered the friction for one day. But as you lie in bed this morning, staring blankly at the ceiling, a cold, terrifying mathematical reality begins to set in. You extrapolate yesterday's profound friction over the timeline of your entire life. If it requires that much sheer, agonizing willpower just to write one paragraph, you think, how can I possibly write an entire book? If it requires an absolute physiological meltdown just to go to the gym on a quiet Saturday morning, how will I ever maintain this discipline on a rainy Tuesday after a brutal 9-hour shift at the office? If I have to go to war with my own nervous system just to have one honest conversation with my partner, how will this relationship ever survive a lifetime of complexities? The math does not add up. The equation of your success is fundamentally, irreparably broken. You realize with a sinking, nauseating feeling in your stomach that the white-knuckle strategy, the act of using raw, conscious discipline to violently override your emotional state and your established neural pathways, is completely unsustainable. You are operating a machine at the absolute red line of its capacity just to move forward a single inch. You cannot redline an engine forever. Eventually, the metal warps, the gaskets blow, the temperature spikes, and the entire system violently, catastrophically fails. You cannot sustain a state of total internal war for a year. You cannot even sustain it for a month. This realization usually leads directly to despair. It is the exact moment when most ambitious, well-intentioned people quietly abandon their dreams, deciding that the cost of transformation is simply too high, the pain too acute, the required energy too vast. They surrender to the gravity of their old patterns and retreat into the comfortable numbness of their former identity. But today, sitting on the edge of the bed, something else happens entirely. Instead of despair, a profound tectonic shift in perspective begins to take root in the deepest layers of your consciousness. It is a quiet, radical realignment of your entire understanding of human behavior. You begin to look at the architecture of your own self-sabotage not as a test of moral fortitude or discipline, but as a misunderstood language. You realize that your entire framework, the way you have been taught to think about success, habits, self-improvement, and personal transformation since childhood, is a toxic illusion. We are culturally brainwashed to approach our own minds as hostile territory that must be conquered. We use the language of warfare to describe our internal lives. We talk about crushing our goals. We talk about killing our bad habits. We talk about dominating our mornings and defeating our inner demons. The multi-billion-dollar self-improvement industry has convinced you that you are a flawed, broken, lazy entity that must be aggressively optimized, disciplined, and whipped into shape. You have been taught that the arsonist inside your head is an evil, malicious monster that must be destroyed. But think about the physics of this internal warfare. When you go to war against a part of yourself, you are fighting an enemy that has access to all of your supplies, all of your memories, all of your fears, and all of your energy. You cannot defeat a part of yourself because you are that part. When you strike the arsonist, you are striking your own face. The harder you fight, the more exhausted you become, and the stronger the resistance grows. The shift in perspective requires you to violently reject this cultural conditioning. It requires you to look at the arsonist, the part of you that procrastinates, the part of you that picks fights, the part of you that numbs out with alcohol or social media, through an entirely new lens. You have to stop looking at it with hatred, and you must start looking at it with profound, overwhelming curiosity. Imagine for a moment that you could separate yourself from the arsonist. Imagine that you could pull that self-sabotaging part of your psychology out of the shadows and invite it to sit in a chair across from you. If you stripped away the anger, the frustration, and the shame, what would you actually see sitting in that chair? You would not see a monster. You would not see a demon. You would see a frightened, exhausted, hyper-vigilant child wearing a suit of iron armor that is 10 sizes too big. This is the great, heartbreaking secret of self-sabotage. The part of you that is ruining your life is not trying to destroy you. It is trying with desperate, misguided intensity to save your life. Self-sabotage is simply a trauma response that has outlived its usefulness. Every single destructive habit you possess was formed at a time in your past when you were powerless, vulnerable, or in pain. The habit was a brilliant, necessary adaptation to a hostile environment. When you were younger, perhaps shutting down and becoming emotionally numb was the only way you could survive a chaotic, highly critical household without losing your mind. Perhaps perfectionism was the only way you could guarantee that a distant, demanding parent would finally offer you a scrap of conditional love. Perhaps overeating was the only reliable, accessible source of comfort you had when you were profoundly lonely and terrified. These behaviors were not flaws. They were your lifelines. They were the brilliant adaptive strategies of a biological system doing whatever it took to keep you psychologically intact. The arsonist was your bodyguard. It built a fortress of dysfunctional habits to keep the pain out. And it worked. You survived. But here is the tragedy. The bodyguard does not know that the war is over. The primitive, subconscious parts of your brain do not possess a sense of time. They do not know that you are no longer a helpless child. They do not know that you are now an adult with agency, resources, and the capacity to set boundaries. The bodyguard is still operating on the original, outdated programming. It is still scanning the horizon for the original threat. So when you finally find a healthy, loving relationship, the bodyguard panics. Warning, it says, vulnerability detected. The last time we were this vulnerable, we were destroyed. Initiate self-sabotage protocol immediately to create distance and ensure our safety. When you sit down to write the book and share your true voice with the world, the bodyguard panics. Warning, visibility detected. The last time we were seen, we were harshly criticized. Initiate procrastination protocol immediately to keep us hidden and safe. You have been treating the bodyguard like an enemy combatant, trying to beat it into submission with productivity planners, alarm clocks, and sheer willpower. You have been screaming at it to stop. But you cannot scream a terrified, traumatized nervous system into a state of peace. You cannot whip a frightened animal into a state of calm. The more you hate the self-sabotaging part of yourself, the more you validate its core belief, that the world is hostile, that you are under attack, and that it needs to fight even harder to protect you. The radical shift in perspective is the realization that self-mastery is not about conquest. It is about integration. You do not need to destroy the arsonist. You need to thank it, validate it, and gently relieve it of its duties. This brings us to the most uncomfortable, avoided, and profoundly necessary phase of human transformation. It is a phase that the high-speed, hyper-optimized culture of modern productivity absolutely despises because it cannot be rushed, it cannot be hacked, and it cannot be quantified on a spreadsheet. It is the phase of emotional digestion. To integrate the arsonist, to relieve the bodyguard of its duties, you have to do the one thing your self-sabotage was explicitly designed to prevent you from doing. You have to feel the pain. We are a society of emotional illiterates. We are taught from a very young age that negative emotions, sadness, anger, fear, grief, jealousy, are bad and should be eliminated, hidden, or fixed as quickly as possible. We are taught to think our way out of our feelings. But an emotion is not a thought. An emotion is a highly specific, physical, biochemical event. It is a cascade of neuropeptides and hormones released by your brain into your bloodstream, designed to create a physical sensation in your body that prompts you to take a specific action. Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, a neuroanatomist, discovered a fascinating, paradigm-shifting biological reality about human emotion. She found that from the moment a trigger occurs, the moment you read the stressful email or hear the sharp tone in your partner's voice, to the moment the chemical cascade of the emotion completely flushes through your bloodstream and dissipates, takes exactly 90 seconds. 1 minute and 30 seconds. That is the entire natural lifespan of an emotion. It rises like a wave, peaks, and breaks upon the shore of your nervous system, receding back into the ocean. If an emotion lasts only 90 seconds, then why do you stay angry at a coworker for 3 weeks? Why do you stay paralyzed by the fear of failure for 5 years? Why do you carry the heavy, suffocating weight of anxiety in your chest every single day of your life? Because you do not allow the wave to break. Instead of feeling the physical sensation of the emotion for 90 seconds, you instantly attach a story to it. Imagine you are sitting at your desk and you receive an ominous, vague message from your manager. "Can you come to my office at 4 p.m.? We need to talk." Instantly, the trigger is pulled. Your amygdala fires. The chemical cascade begins. You feel a sudden, sharp heat in your chest. Your stomach tightens. Your throat constricts. This is the emotion. It is a pure physical sensation of fear. If you were to simply close your eyes, breathe, and focus entirely on the physical heat in your chest without thinking a single thought, the chemicals would metabolize, and the intense physical panic would naturally subside in 90 seconds. But you do not do that, because society has trained you to immediately jump from your body into your mind. You feel the heat in your chest, and your intellect instantly begins to panic. You begin to weave a frantic, apocalyptic narrative to explain the physical sensation. "We need to talk," your brain echoes. "They are going to fire me. They found out about the mistake in the quarterly report. I am going to lose my job. If I lose my job, I will lose my apartment. I will be bankrupt. I will be a total failure. Everyone will know." You are no longer feeling an emotion. You are running a simulation. And here is a fatal flaw in the human operating system. Your brain cannot tell the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. Every time you run the catastrophic story in your head, your brain believes the threat is happening right now in real time. So it triggers another emotional wave. More cortisol, more adrenaline, another 90 seconds. Then you loop the story again, another wave. You loop the story 50 times before 4 p.m. You have artificially sustained a 90-second chemical reaction for 6 hours. You are keeping the emotion alive by feeding it the oxygen of your own terrifying narrative. This is what anxiety actually is. Anxiety is not a feeling. Anxiety is the act of blocking a feeling with a story. Your self-sabotaging habits, the numbing, the perfectionism, the overthinking, are all mechanisms designed to intercept the 90-second wave before it peaks. You feel the tightness in your chest, and instead of letting it pass, you immediately pick up your phone and scroll for 2 hours. You intercept the feeling with a distraction. But emotions are governed by the laws of physics. Energy cannot be destroyed. It can only be transformed or stored. When you refuse to feel an emotion, when you numb it, suppress it, or intercept it, it does not disappear. It is simply pushed down into the deep, dark basement of your physical body. It becomes trapped trauma. It becomes the chronic tension in your shoulders. It becomes the digestive issues you can't explain. It becomes the sudden, explosive rage over a minor inconvenience. Your body is a massive, overflowing storage unit of unprocessed, unfelt, 90-second waves of grief, fear, and anger. The mountain that stands before you is not made of external circumstances. The mountain is made entirely of your own unexpressed, unprocessed emotional history. It is the accumulated weight of 1,000 moments where you chose to run away from a feeling rather than sit still and let it burn through you. The radical shift in perspective demands that you entirely change your relationship with your own emotional discomfort. You must learn the lost art of emotional digestion. The next time the trigger occurs, the next time the urge to self-sabotage rises, the next time you feel the desperate, frantic need to procrastinate, to pick a fight, or to numb out, you must perform an act of supreme, terrifying courage. You must do absolutely nothing. You must sit perfectly still. You must close your eyes. You must actively sever the connection between the physical sensation in your body and the apocalyptic story in your head. You feel the terrifying urge to abandon the project. You feel the heavy, crushing weight of imposter syndrome in your throat. Do not tell yourself a story about why you are a failure. Do not tell yourself a story about how the project is doomed. Simply drop your consciousness down into your physical body. Locate the exact geographical epicenter of the discomfort. Where does it live? Is it a tightness in the jaw? Is it a cold hollowness in the stomach? Is it a fluttering panic in the chest? Focus all of your attention on the raw physical sensation as if you were a curious scientist observing a strange, temporary phenomenon. Breathe deeply into the center of the tightness. Welcome the feeling. Invite it in. Say to your own nervous system, I feel the fear. I feel the panic. It is okay. You are allowed to be here. I am not going to run from you this time. I am not going to numb you. Show me what you have. This is the alchemy. This is the moment the magic happens. When you finally stop fighting the feeling, when you drop the resistance and lean into the discomfort, something miraculous occurs. The wave peaks. The fire burns hot for a few agonizing seconds. And then it breaks. The heat begins to dissipate. The tightness in your chest begins to loosen. The biological chemicals metabolize and flush out of your bloodstream. The 90 seconds expire. You open your eyes and the room is exactly the same. You are unharmed. You survive the emotion. And more importantly, the desperate, overwhelming, compulsive urge to self-sabotage, the urge to reach for the phone, the alcohol, or the toxic argument has vanished. The arsonist drops the match because you finally listened to what the arsonist was trying to tell you. When you learn how to process your emotions in real time, self-sabotage loses its entire purpose. If you are no longer terrified of feeling your own feelings, you no longer need a bodyguard to protect you from them. If you are willing to feel the pain of failure, you no longer need perfectionism to shield you. If you are willing to feel the profound vulnerability of being loved, you no longer need to pick fights to push people away. You strip the phantom puppeteer of all its power. But as you sit with this revelation, as the architecture of emotional processing becomes clear, you must prepare yourself for the final, most heart-wrenching phase of this perspective shift. It is a phase that catches almost everyone completely off guard. When you finally stop self-sabotaging, when you finally drop the armor, stop the numbing, and begin to step into the actual, vibrant, successful life you have always wanted, you expect to feel pure, unadulterated joy. You expect to feel like you have finally arrived at the summit, victorious and triumphant. But you do not. Instead, as you step into your new healthy reality, you are suddenly hit with a massive, overwhelming, seemingly inexplicable wave of profound sadness. You sit in your new peaceful relationship, or you look at the successful completion of your project, and you feel like crying. This is the grief of the old self. We talk endlessly about the excitement of change, but we rarely talk about the grief of growth. You cannot step into a new identity without attending the funeral of the old one. And the old identity, no matter how toxic, no matter how self-destructive, no matter how much pain it caused you, was still yours. It was your constant companion for years. It was the only way you knew how to survive. You have to mourn the loss of your coping mechanisms. You have to mourn the loss of the victim narrative that kept you safe from the burden of responsibility. You have to mourn the loss of the familiar chaos that made you feel alive. There is a deep, agonizing comfort in being broken. When you are broken, when you are constantly self-sabotaging and struggling, society grants you a certain level of grace. Less is expected of you. You are allowed to complain. You are allowed to be the tragic hero of a story of perpetual suffering. People sympathize with you. When you heal, when you conquer the mountain and become competent, reliable, and successful, You lose that exemption. You step into the harsh, demanding light of absolute accountability. You are no longer the victim of your circumstances. You are the undisputed author of your reality. And that is a lonely, terrifying transition. But the grief goes even deeper than the loss of the coping mechanism. When you finally stop numbing yourself, when the fog clears and you see the world with sharp, emotional clarity, you are forced to look backward. You look back at the last 5, 10, or 20 years of your life, and you are forced to mourn the staggering, heartbreaking loss of your own potential. You realize how much time you wasted fighting ghosts. You realize how many beautiful relationships you burned to the ground because you were terrified of intimacy. You realize how many brilliant ideas you abandoned because you were paralyzed by perfectionism. You realize how much of your precious, limited existence was squandered in the dark basement of your own avoidance. The grief of realizing that you are the author of your own suffering is profound. It is a heavy, bitter pill to swallow. Many people retreat right at this exact moment. They begin to heal, they feel the overwhelming grief of their wasted potential, and the pain is so acute that they panic and run back to their old, self-sabotaging habits just to numb the realization. You must not run. You must sit in the grief. You must allow yourself to mourn the time you lost. You must hold a funeral for the version of you that was too scared to try. You must look at that old, terrified, self-sabotaging version of yourself, the child in the oversized iron armor, and you must extend the most radical, transformative grace possible. Thank you, you must say to your past self. Thank you for doing everything you could to keep us alive. Thank you for the perfectionism, the overthinking, and the numbness. I know you were just trying to protect us from the pain of the world. I know you were doing the absolute best you could with the tools you had at the time. You did a good job. We survived. But the war is over now. We are safe. You can rest. I have the steering wheel now. This is the ultimate alchemy. This is how you dissolve the mountain. You do not conquer the mountain by planting a flag on its peak in a display of aggressive dominance. You do not blow it up with dynamite. You do not fight it. You dissolve the mountain by realizing that it is made of ice, and that the only way to melt it is to apply the warmth of your own relentless, uncompromising, radical self-compassion. The perspective shift is total. The entire paradigm has been inverted. You look out at your life and the landscape is fundamentally altered. The obstacle is no longer in your way. The obstacle is the way. The triggers that used to send you spiraling into self-sabotage are no longer your enemies. They are your greatest teachers. Every time you feel the urge to procrastinate, every time you feel the urge to pick a fight, every time you feel the panic rising in your chest, you no longer see it as a failure. You see it as a highly precise, localized map pointing exactly to the specific, unhealed emotional wound that requires your attention next. Your self-sabotage was just a flare shot up into the dark night sky of your psychology, screaming, "Look here. Here is the trauma. Here is the fear. Here is where we need to heal." You are no longer the victim of your nervous system. You are the compassionate architect of its rewiring. You know how to sit with the 90-second wave. You know how to sever the story from the sensation. You know how to grieve the old identity and allow the new one to breathe. The exhaustion of the internal war is gone. The white-knuckle grip of pure willpower has been released. You are no longer fighting the current. You have learned how to swim. But as the profound peace of this realization settles over you, as the silence in the room transforms from a terrifying void into a comfortable sanctuary, a new, highly practical reality begins to emerge. The internal architecture is flawless. The philosophy is sound. The alchemy of grief has transmuted your self-sabotage into profound self-awareness. But you still exist in the physical, external world. The alarm is still going to ring tomorrow. The business still needs to be built. The difficult conversations still need to be spoken out loud to real, unpredictable human beings. The daily routines still need to be executed. You have stopped digging the hole. You have mapped the mountain. You have befriended the arsonist. But you still have to wake up and actually climb the stone. The threshold of action. The burden of the blank slate. Based on the book The Mountain Is You and adapted into a narrative format to make its ideas practical and engaging. It is 6 a.m. on a Monday morning. The alarm on your nightstand pulls you out of a deep sleep with a sharp, metallic rhythm. You open your eyes. The room is dark, the air is cold, and the profound, life-altering epiphanies of your weekend suddenly feel very, very far away. Over the past few days, you have journeyed through the deepest, darkest corridors of your own psychology. You have stared directly into the eyes of the silent arsonist, the terrified, hyper-vigilant part of you that burns down your success to keep you safely hidden in the familiar ashes. You have mapped the invisible architecture of your avoidance. You have learned to sit perfectly still in the roaring fire of a 90-second emotional wave without reaching for a distraction. You have even grieved the agonizing, necessary loss of your old, self-sabotaging identity. In the controlled, isolated sanctuary of your weekend, the theory was flawless. The philosophy was impenetrable. The clarity was absolute. But as you throw off the covers and place your bare feet on the cold hardwood floor, a new, heavy, deeply uncomfortable reality begins to set in. The sanctuary is closed. The laboratory is shut down. Today, you are no longer dealing with the theory of the mountain. You are standing at the physical base of the rock face. The wind is howling, and the world expects you to climb. You take a shower, put on your clothes, and step out into the world. You commute through the gray morning traffic, surrounded by thousands of other people enclosed in their own metal boxes, fighting their own invisible wars. You walk through the glass doors of your office building, or you open your laptop to face your business, or you sit across the breakfast table from your partner. And immediately within the first hour of your day, the beautiful, fragile architecture of your new perspective is violently tested by the sheer chaotic friction of real, unpredictable human life. This is the phase of the journey that the self-help industry almost universally fails to prepare you for. We are sold the intoxicating myth of the breakthrough. We are told that once we have the grand epiphany, once we cry the tears, uncover the childhood trauma, and identify our self-sabotaging triggers, the clouds will magically part. We believe that healing is a destination we arrive at, a final door we walk through, after which we will forever float through life on a cloud of unbothered, Zen-like tranquility. But as you sit in your morning meeting and a colleague passive-aggressively undermines a project you care deeply about, you realize the brutal truth. The breakthrough does not change the world around you. The breakthrough only removes your blindfold. Your colleague is still insecure and territorial. The market is still volatile. Your inbox is still overflowing with demands. The people in your life who have grown accustomed to your lack of boundaries, who have historically benefited from your martyrdom, your people-pleasing, and your avoidance, are still expecting the old version of you to show up and play your assigned role. When you stop self-sabotaging, the external ecosystem that relies on your self-sabotage will immediately, aggressively push back. Imagine you have spent the last 5 years acting as the emotional sponge for a highly dramatic, constantly complaining friend. Your self-sabotaging pattern was the martyr. You absorbed their toxicity to avoid facing your own stagnant life. But this weekend, you decided to drop the armor. You decided to focus on your own mountain. When that friend calls you at 11 a.m. on Monday with a brand new manufactured crisis, and you gently but firmly tell them, "I care about you, but I don't have the emotional bandwidth to discuss this today. I need to focus on my work," what do you think will happen? They will not congratulate you on your newfound emotional intelligence. They will not applaud your healthy boundaries. They will be furious. Their amygdala will fire. They will feel abandoned. They might accuse you of being selfish, cold, or arrogant. They will apply massive psychological pressure to force you back into the old, comfortable dynamic where you endlessly serve their needs. And as you sit there holding the phone, listening to their guilt trip, the internal friction will spike to an agonizing level. Your primitive brain, the bodyguard, will scream at you to apologize, to back down, to return to the familiar script. "If we lose this friendship," the bodyguard whispers, "we will be alone. It is safer to just listen to them for an hour. Just compromise this one time." This is the threshold of action. This is the agonizing space between having the direction and executing the climb. You know exactly what you are supposed to do. You know that if you surrender to their guilt trip, you are handing the match right back to the arsonist. You are abandoning your own peak to go sit in the mud at the base of theirs. But holding the line feels terrible. It does not feel victorious. It feels like you are hurting someone. It feels deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. And this is the first, most critical realization of your new life. Doing the right thing, executing the healthy behavior, breaking the pattern of self-sabotage, will often feel completely wrong to your nervous system. When you have been navigating by a broken compass your entire life, true north will inevitably feel like the wrong direction. You have to learn to tolerate the profound discomfort of disappointing other people in the service of your own integrity. You have to learn to sit in the tension of a boundary being tested without rushing to smooth it over. You have to allow the people around you to experience their own uncomfortable reactions to your growth without absorbing their emotions as your own. You hold the boundary, you hang up the phone, you feel the 90-second wave of guilt crash over you, and you let it break. You do not tell yourself a story about being a bad friend. You just feel the heat in your chest until it dissipates. And then you turn back to your work. But the friction of the external world is not the only trap waiting for you in the phase of execution. There is a much more subtle, highly intellectual trap that catches the smartest, most self-aware people in its web. It is the fatal distinction between motion and action. You have spent the last few sessions deep in the realm of motion. You have been analyzing your triggers. You have been decoding your childhood traumas. You have been tracking your emotional waves. You have been reading the topography of the mountain and redesigning your internal architecture. Motion is incredibly seductive. It is a highly potent psychological narcotic because it perfectly mimics the sensation of progress without requiring a single ounce of actual real-world risk. When you spend 4 hours journaling about why you have a fear of failure, you feel like you are doing the work. When you talk to a therapist for months about the origins of your perfectionism, you feel like you are healing. When you draft an intricate, highly detailed 20-step outline for a business plan, you feel like an entrepreneur. But motion will never, ever, under any circumstances, produce a tangible result in the physical world. Motion is entirely contained within the sterile, perfectly controlled safety of your own mind. It involves zero vulnerability. When you are merely in motion, you cannot be judged by the market. You cannot be rejected by a partner. You cannot fail because you haven't actually built anything that can fall down. Action, on the other hand, is the behavior that actually moves your physical body up the side of the mountain. Action is the behavior that delivers an outcome. Journaling about your fear of failure is motion. Publishing the messy, imperfect, terrifying first draft of your article for the world to see is action. Analyzing your attachment style is motion. Looking your partner in the eye, dropping your defensive sarcasm and saying, "I feel really insecure when you do that, and I need reassurance," is action. Researching the optimal biomechanics of a deadlift is motion. Walking into the gym, picking up a heavy weight, and feeling the physical weakness of your own muscles is action. Why do we get hopelessly, chronically trapped in motion? Why do we endlessly prepare, research, optimize, and heal without ever actually pulling the trigger on our own lives? Because action shatters the illusion of our own perfection. When you cross the threshold from motion to action, you are no longer dealing with a perfect, theoretical blueprint in a vacuum. You are violently colliding with the messy, unpredictable, highly resistant, utterly apathetic physical world. If you write the paragraph, you have to face the agonizing reality that your current skill level does not match your impeccable taste. The words on the page will be clumsy. They will be inadequate. They will not reflect the brilliant, glowing vision in your head. If you set the boundary with your toxic family member, you have to face the terrifying reality of their explosive retaliation and the messy fallout of family politics. Motion allows you to maintain the intoxicating fantasy of your unblemished potential. As long as the book remains an outline in your head, it is a flawless masterpiece. As long as the business remains a spreadsheet on your desktop, it is a billion-dollar unicorn that everyone will love. Action demands that you step into the arena and be mediocre. Action demands that you be a beginner. Action demands that you stumble, fall, skin your knees, and look foolish. And this is the bitter, jagged pill you must swallow today, on this ordinary Monday. You cannot optimize your way out of being a beginner. You cannot heal your way out of having to do the hard, boring, unglamorous work. Healing your self-sabotage does not make the work easier. It simply removes the massive psychological boulder you were carrying on your back while trying to do the work. The mountain is still steep. The gravity is still heavy. The air is still thin. You have to be willing to be bad at your new identity before you can ever be good at it. You must completely surrender the ego's childish demand for immediate mastery. You have to accept with profound humility that the first 100 steps you take up this mountain will be clumsy, flawed, and deeply uncomfortable. You open the blank document, you ignore the urge to research one more thing, you place your fingers on the keys, you write a terrible, agonizingly bad sentence. You feel the physical sting of your own mediocrity. You feel the perfectionist screaming in the basement of your mind to delete it and hide. You let the 90-second wave of shame break over you. And then you write the next terrible sentence. This is what self-mastery actually looks like. It is not a cinematic montage set to inspiring music. It is a quiet, brutal, relentless grinding of stone against stone. It is the alchemy of turning mundane, daily friction into forward momentum. But as you push forward, moving from motion into action, you will inevitably encounter the most dangerous, soul-crushing phase of the entire journey. It is a phase that breaks more people than failure itself. It is the illusion of the plateau. Let us imagine you have successfully applied the system. You stopped self-sabotaging. You stopped drinking to numb your anxiety. You stopped picking fights with your partner. You started executing your daily routines with cold, uncompromising discipline. You have cast 30 consecutive votes for your new identity. You have climbed steadily for a month. You wake up on day 31, you walk into the bathroom, you look in the mirror, and absolutely nothing has visibly changed. Your physical body looks exactly the same. The balance in your bank account is identical. Your career has not miraculously catapulted into the stratosphere. The world has not thrown a parade in your honor. This is the valley of disappointment, and it is the graveyard of a million brilliant, hard-fought transformations. We are biologically wired as an ancient species to expect linear, immediate, visible returns on our caloric investments. When primitive humans expended massive energy to hunt an animal, they immediately received the reward of the meat. Our neurology is entirely, obsessively optimized for the short-term payoff. But the architecture of profound personal change, the physical reality of moving a mountain, does not operate on a linear scale. It operates on a compounding curve. And the defining, maddening characteristic of a compounding curve is that the early stages of massive effort are practically invisible. Imagine a room that is 25 degrees Fahrenheit. It is freezing. In the exact center of the room, sitting on a metal table, is a single, massive block of solid ice. You are standing in the room and your sole objective is to melt the ice. You begin to apply heat, expending massive amounts of energy, focus, and discipline. The temperature in the room slowly begins to rise. 26 degrees. You look at the ice. It remains absolutely solid. 27 degrees. You are working hard, sweating, putting in the daily effort, ignoring your excuses. The ice does not change. 28 degrees. 29, 30, 31. You have expended an enormous amount of time, energy, and psychological capital. You have fundamentally, measurably altered the climate of the entire room. Yet if you look only at the block of ice, you see absolutely zero physical evidence of your labor. The outcome is identically the same as it was when you started at 25 degrees. This is the exact precarious moment when the rational, outcome-obsessed, highly critical part of your brain screams in protest. This is not working, the voice says, laced with panic and cynicism. I have been doing the hard work for a month. I am not self-sabotaging. I am facing my emotions. I am putting in the friction. I am sacrificing my comfort. And I have nothing, literally nothing to show for it. The system is a lie. The effort is pointless. I am still the exact same person. I should just go back to the comfortable numbness of my old life. At least there I didn't have to try so hard. But then you keep working. The temperature hits 32 degrees, and the ice begins to melt. It does not melt because of the one single magical degree of shift between 31 and 32. The melting is the sudden, violent, visible culmination of all the latent, invisible kinetic energy you spent weeks building up from 25 to 31. The work was never wasted. It was simply being stored. This is the profound, deeply frustrating, universally misunderstood reality of the plateau of latent potential. When you sit with your uncomfortable emotions instead of numbing them, when you execute the difficult action instead of overthinking it, you are raising the temperature of the room. You are fundamentally altering the physical neuroplasticity of your brain. You are building thick sheaths of myelin around brand new neural pathways. You are literally restructuring the microscopic, biological architecture of your basal ganglia. None of this is visible in the bathroom mirror. None of this shows up in your quarterly performance review immediately. If you complain about not seeing success despite working hard and avoiding self-sabotage for a month, it is exactly like complaining that the ice hasn't melted when you've raised the temperature from 25 to 31 degrees. Your work is not in vain. The mountain is moving, millimeter by invisible millimeter, deep beneath the crust of the earth. The breakthrough is coming, but you must be willing to survive the profound, echoing, agonizing boredom of the invisible phase. You have to fall in love with the plateau. You have to divorce your sense of self-worth from the immediate outcome and marry it entirely to the daily execution of the process. We have romanticized the concept of success and healing to such an extreme, toxic degree that we believe the daily reality of a transformed life must be thrilling. We assume that people who have conquered their mountains wake up every morning trembling with passion, flooded with joy, and radiating divine inspiration. They do not. The defining characteristic of true self-mastery is not a permanent state of high motivation or unshakable joy. The defining characteristic of mastery is the ability to endure the sheer, agonizing monotony of doing the exact same, fundamentally boring, unglamorous right things over and over and over again, long after the initial novelty and inspiration have completely worn off. The greatest threat to your future is not failure. You know how to survive failure. The greatest threat is boredom. When the new healthy habit becomes a routine, it stops being exciting. When you communicate your boundaries effectively for the 50th time, there is no dopamine rush of a massive psychological breakthrough. There is only the quiet, dull, ordinary reality of maintaining a healthy relationship. This is where the amateur quits and the professional remains. The amateur relies on the emotional spike of the new epiphany. When the emotion fades, the arsonist wakes up, whispers that the boredom is unbearable, and hands them a match to create some exciting, familiar chaos. The master relies on the architecture of the system. The master expects the boredom, welcomes the plateau, and executes the script anyway, because the action is no longer tied to an emotional state. It is tied to their fundamental, uncompromising identity. But what happens when the system inevitably cracks? Because it will crack. The architecture you have built in your mind is perfect, but the world you live in is fundamentally chaotic, and your biology is fundamentally flawed. You will get sick. A family emergency will require your total, undivided attention for a week, destroying your carefully constructed routines. A massive, unreasonable project at work will demand 14-hour days, draining your willpower battery and your prefrontal cortex to absolute zero. You will experience a moment of profound grief or unexpected loss. The entropy of life will always eventually break your walls down. When this happens, when you are exhausted, when you are vulnerable, when your defenses are shattered, the phantom puppeteer will immediately, ruthlessly seize the opportunity. The old identity will rise from the ashes of your fatigue. You will miss the workout. You will drink too much. You will snap at your partner and start a toxic, unnecessary argument. You will spend 6 hours scrolling through a screen, completely numbing out from the pressure of your life. You will self-sabotage. And in the immediate aftermath of that failure, the dark, incredibly familiar voice will whisper in your ear, louder and more persuasive than ever before. "See?" the voice will say, dripping with cynical validation. "I told you this wouldn't last. All that journaling, all that emotional processing, all that effort, and you are still exactly the same piece of garbage you always were. You ruined the streak, you broke the trust. The system is a lie. You cannot change your nature. You might as well give up entirely and go back to the way things were." This is the most critical, defining moment in the entire architecture of human transformation. It is not the moment of initiation that defines your life. It is the moment of failure. Perfection is not the goal of self-mastery. Perfection is a childish illusion that leads directly to fragility. A system that requires absolute, unbroken perfection to function is a brittle system destined to shatter at the first sign of pressure. The mark of a true master, the absolute defining characteristic of someone who has successfully moved their mountain, is not that they never fail, never slip, or never self-sabotage again. It is the velocity of their recovery. Missing the mark once is an accident. It is a byproduct of living in a chaotic universe. It is a biological reality of being a tired, stressed, emotionally complex human being. But spiraling into a pit of shame and missing the mark for a week because you missed it once, that is a choice. When the failure occurs, when you catch yourself holding the match and smelling the smoke, you must not spiral into the heavy, familiar, self-indulgent emotion of guilt. Guilt is a completely useless emotion in the physics of change. Guilt is just another, highly disguised form of self-obsession. Guilt keeps your camera focused entirely on yourself, looking backward at the mistake, paralyzed by your own inadequacy. Guilt is the arsonist's favorite tool to keep you stuck in the ashes. Instead of guilt, you must deploy radical, cold, objective curiosity. You must look at the failure with the eye of an investigating architect. The system failed today, you tell yourself, removing all moral judgment from the equation. Why? Was the emotional wave too strong to digest? Was my willpower battery completely drained by an external source I didn't account for? Did I slip back into the martyr pattern because I felt insecure about my value? You analyze the crack in the foundation. You make a microscopic practical adjustment. You forgive yourself instantly, with radical, uncompromising grace. And you immediately, aggressively return to the baseline of your healthy behavior the very next hour. You do not try to compensate. If you missed a workout and ate terrible food, you do not punish your body with a brutal 2-hour starvation and cardio session the next day. That is the old mentality of warfare and conquest. That is the ego trying to violently balance the scales. You simply execute the next right action. You drink a glass of water. You sit with the shame for 90 seconds, let it break, and let it go. You show up. You repair the streak. The ability to recover quickly, to forgive yourself instantly without lingering in the drama of your own failure, and to return to the boring, unglamorous baseline without dramatic emotional fluctuations is the ultimate untouchable superpower of human behavior. So here you are. The morning traffic is moving. The office is humming. The world is turning. You have walked through the entire terrifying architecture of your own mind. You have seen the invisible strings of the phantom puppeteer. You have realized that the mountain blocking your path was never an external force. It was the accumulated weight of your own unprocessed pain, your outdated survival mechanisms, and your paralyzing fear of your own potential. You understand the profound, terrifying power of emotional digestion. You know the exact mathematical equations of identity, friction, motion versus action, and the alchemy of grief. You have the blueprint. You have seen the physics of the water, the anatomy of the ship, and the mechanics of the sail. But understanding the physics of a parachute does not mean you are ready for the visceral, breathtaking terror of stepping out of the plane. The profound, heavy, inescapable truth of this entire journey is that you are now entirely, utterly out of excuses. The comforting ignorance of your past is permanently gone. The scapegoats have all fled. You can no longer blame your parents, your ex-partner, the economy, or your genetics. You are standing naked in the harsh, clear, unforgiving light of your own agency. You know exactly what the next right action is. You know exactly where the friction needs to be faced. You know exactly which 90-second emotional wave you have been running from, and you know exactly how to sit still and let it burn through you. But knowing is a state of motion. The door's open, the environment is waiting. The basal ganglia is ready to receive the new code, but it requires the currency of your physical effort. The old ghosts of your past failures are watching quietly from the shadows of your mind, waiting to see if you will retreat into the warm, familiar ashes of your old excuses, or if you will step out into the cold, chaotic, entirely unwritten, magnificent space of the present moment. There are no more books to read before you start. There is no more research to do. There is no more healing required to prepare you for the action. The architecture is complete. The map is drawn. But a map cannot walk for you. A mountain cannot be conquered in the mind. It must be climbed with the body, step by agonizing step, blister by blister, choice by choice. You understand the mechanics of your life now. You see the matrix of your own self-sabotage. You have the clarity you have been desperately seeking for years. But clarity is not completion. Clarity is simply the removal of the heavy fog. The road is now entirely visible. It stretches out before you, steep, jagged, and unforgiving, demanding that you take the first tiny, deeply uncomfortable step. The arsonist is quiet for now, but the wind is blowing, and there will be sparks again. There will always be sparks. Your job is no longer to prevent the sparks, but to stop providing the gasoline. The day is beginning. The silence is waiting for your answer. The mountain is you. And what happens next is entirely, terrifyingly, beautifully up to you.